Hi, my name is Frank. Welcome back to channel 33 RPM, your channel for vinyl gear and more. This is a question and answer video, and this is probably one of the more difficult question and answer videos I've ever done, because some of the questions you guys posed, these are things that we as record collectors, I think, don't talk about often enough or acknowledge, but it's really important stuff. And after seeing these questions, it's kind of cool to know that I'm not going through some of this stuff alone, and a lot of us are facing some of these same challenges. So let's dive into these questions. All right, this first question comes from Mikey, and Mikey wrote, I am at the point where I've built my collection to include the bedrock sets of bands and artists I cherish, and a whole lot of one-offs too, but after a hard drive at that, the thrill of the hunt is sort of gone. It's still my preferred at-home medium, of course. He's talking about vinyl, but in summer I'm outside if I'm not sleeping or at work, so I'm not inside spinning much from May to October, really. Maybe it's going to be a seasonal thing, not sure. You dealing with this as well? So this is a really good question, and it's really relatable to me because I'm going through sort of a similar experience. I collected records as a kid and as a teenager, and I kept most of those records, but like many people, I switched to CDs and whatever else. So when I got back into record collecting around 2008, 2009, my focus, at least at first, was really on getting those records I always wanted as a kid, right? Particularly the vintage pressings, and that was a lot of fun. And through that, same as Mikey, I kind of discovered new artists and went down various rabbit holes. But then at some point, it was like, well, I kind of got everything I set out to get, and the thrill of crate digging and the thrill of record collecting did diminish at that point. So nowadays I'm probably buying 10 to 20% of the number of albums I was buying, say, like 10 years ago. But luckily, through the process of going back and buying all the records I wanted, I discovered a lot of new bands. And luckily, the bands I liked back in the day, many of them are still releasing stuff nowadays. So there's still a lot of newer stuff for me to buy, if that makes sense. So a lot of the records, if not most of the records I buy nowadays, are new releases, because I do have all that back catalog stuff I always wanted, but there's always tons of new stuff to discover, and that's what's kind of keeping me going. In terms of the second part of Mikey's question, where he's talking about listening to records in the summertime, again, I'm in the exact same boat, and it's really cool to know that other people are kind of going through similar experiences, where in the summertime, man, I'm not down here in the basement or the music room quite a bit. I'm spending my time outside, whether it's on the deck or in the pool or in the garage or whatnot. And okay, cover your ears, because I'm going to swear here. I'm going to say the S word, but when I'm outside, I'm not spinning records, I'm strumming. I got to beep that out. And that's just the way it is. So I do listen to a lot more records in the winter months, and I'm not sure if I'd have it any other way, because, as I said, summers here are short and I like to enjoy my time outside. So it's good to know that I'm not the only one going through this stuff. Tony Hill wrote, how many records in your collection have not been played in a year or more? And that's another good question. That's another one that really made me think, and I almost hesitate to answer this one, but if I'm honest, I do not listen to most of my records in any given year. It'd really be, I was going to say impossible, not impossible, but it'd be difficult to listen to them all, just because life is there, right? We got to do our adulting. I got to work, maintain the house, maintain the yard, do stuff with the kids activities, all that kind of stuff. So if I think about it, I want to answer this question. If I think about it in a given week, I'm being generous here. Let's say I listen to 5 different records in a given week, and there's many weeks where I don't, but let's say 5. So 5 times 52, so like 260 records a year. Again, being generous, it's probably less, but let's say I listen to 262 records a year, and let's say I have 1,400 records. So what's the math here? That means there's about 1,150 records I haven't listened to in the past year. So I'm listening to like 15 to 20% of my collection only in any given year. But I think that's the reality of the situation. So someone may say, well, Frank, why do you have all those records? I buy records to listen to, but I'm also a collector, and I like to think of my collection, I guess, as a bit of a library. So if I know I want to pick a particular record to listen to or a particular pressing, I do have it. So that's kind of my excuse for this whole thing. But yeah, this is a good question, Tony, and really You really had me think about this. Brian from Brian's Vinyl Records asks, what are your thoughts on multiple copies of the same album? Would you recommend this to a new collector? So, despite the fact that I just admitted that I only listen to 15% of my collection in any given year, yeah, I do have multiple pressings of many records. So let me get into this a little bit more. So I don't get into collecting all the modern variants, right? Like a Taylor Swift puts out a new album, there's like 1,000,005 versions of it. I don't really go for that. And I don't mean to single out Taylor Swift. A bunch of artists do this. There's always various variants of all these records. But when it comes to like the vintage stuff, original pressings, like pre-1990 pressings for my favorite bands, yeah, I have multiple pressings of albums from like Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne, Judas Priest, Kiss, Alice Cooper, Led Zeppelin. And I think it's fun to collect, right? That speaks to the collector in me. I buy records to listen to, but I'm also a music collector. You maybe think, well, Frank, what's the point? What's the purpose of having all of those multiple pressings? It's just, as I said, it's fun. And there are, so when I talk about multiple pressings, you know, Led Zeppelin once, they got a Canadian pressing, a US pressing, a modern reissue, a Japanese pressing, a UK pressing, that kind of thing, if you get my point. And a lot of people don't realize that there's subtle differences also between a lot of these pressings. I'm not just talking about the fact that the Japanese pressing has an obi strip and the US one doesn't. That's one example, but they can sound different. And there's these subtle things that appeal to the music collector nerd in me. But that's just my personal choice, right? My money, that's how I choose to spend it, which speaks to the second half of Brian's question where he asked, would you recommend buying multiple copies for the new collector? It's really up to you, man. It's really, not that Brian is a new collector, but he's speaking in general terms. It's really up to the collector. I'm not going to tell you how to spend your money, and I don't want anyone to tell me how to spend my money. You got to do what you enjoy, and you got to do what's fun. If you want to go buy 25 copies of a new Taylor Swift record, as one example, knock yourself out. If you want 10 original copies of Led Zeppelin 1 from 10 different countries, knock yourself out. So whatever you enjoy doing. I mean, if I was new to it, I would probably focus on getting as many different albums as I could, but if that's not your thing, if you're the biggest Kiss fan in the world and you want to collect every version of their debut, man, knock yourself out.
Channel 33 RPM.
Today's video is brought to you by the Channel 33 RPM store. I keep prices as low as I can and I ship worldwide. Proceeds support this channel and help it continue to grow. Sterling, what did Sterling write? Do you ever enter your music room thinking you want to spin an LP and then think of the work involved, realize you're not in the mood for all that and say, screw it, I am just streaming something? Yes, man. Absolutely, all the time. I often come downstairs, I'm like, I want to listen to some tunes, I want to check some stuff out. And then I look and I can't decide which, I'm looking over here at my wall of records, I can't decide which of these records I want to listen to, or I just don't feel like going through the ritual, right? Like, I love the ritual of putting on a record, taking off its jacket, cleaning it, putting on the turntable, dropping the needle, but just because you love something like that doesn't mean you always have to love it or always be in the mood for it. So there definitely are times where I'm like, no, screw it, I'm just going to stream some music. And with the right equipment, again, I'm swearing, right? Stream. But with the right equipment, streaming can sound good, but at the same time, sometimes I also find streaming overwhelming because all of a sudden you have access to basically every song ever recorded or released, right? So that can be overwhelming in its own way. So nowadays, oftentimes, if I don't feel like spinning vinyl and just want to do something mindless, in those cases, I've recently got a subscription to Sirius XM Satellite. I bought a vehicle, it came with Sirius. I tried it, then I bought a year-long membership. I think it's like $5 a month Canadian for a year or something like that. And that way, the songs are all pre-programmed, and there's so many options there. You feel like hair metal, listen to Hair Nation, or, Ozzy's Boneyard. There's a punk station, jazz, blues. There's just so much selection there. And that's also a music discovery tool in a sense. And it's also, once in a while they play a tune I haven't heard forever. I'm like, oh man, I remember that song. I'm glad I heard that one again. So at the end of the day, if I want mindless listening, that's still kind of cool and still kind of fun lately, it has been Sirius XM Satellite. Okay, this next one comes from Unstable Network, and he or she writes, what do you do with the records you'll never listen to? In my case, old gospel music. I don't have any old gospel music, and generally I buy records for the sake of listening to them. I buy records to listen to. Long gone are the days where I just go to the thrift store and buy a bunch of records just to buy them. So all the records I have in my collection are there on purpose. That said, there are records on the shelves behind me that I don't listen to, or I bought thinking they were one thing and I never really got into it. So there's definitely some fat in my collection that can be trimmed, and I do trim it. The key to this whole thing is purging. A lot of people hate purging their record collections, and they fear they will regret it. But I think, at least for me, it's an important part of how I maintain my collection and keep it a certain size and make sure it's always like stuff I actually like. So right now I'm looking in my closet there. I have like 4 boxes of records, probably like 200 records that are in my potential to be purged pile. And they've been there for like a year. And if I don't miss them, I know I won't likely have an issue purging them. I just got to price them and stuff. It's a time issue. I haven't had time to price them, but I do try to purge the collection every 2 or 3 years, sell them, and I take that money and I reinvest it in my collection, buying stuff I know I will like. So it's kind of, to use an overused cliche, it's kind of a win-win, right? Because someone else gets the record I'm selling. Hopefully they'll go to a good home and they'll love it or whatever, and I can use the money and reinvestment. So yeah, that is the key, man. That is the key. Purging. I do highly recommend it. This question comes from John. John writes, what are your plans to sell your collection and not burden your family with dealing with it? So John is talking about, basically, in other words, what am I going to do with what's going to happen to all my records when I'm dead? And believe it or not, this is something I have been giving some thought to lately. I turned 50 years old this month, and it's at this point where I obviously have more miles in back of me than I do in front of me, unless I live to be 100 years old, which is not likely. But I guess when you reach a certain age, right, you start to kind of think about these things. And I don't really have a solid plan for it. I know I don't want to burden my kids or wife or whoever with dealing with a bunch of records they don't know what to deal with. I mean, I won't be here, so really, ultimately, it doesn't matter, but whatever. I would hate to see them sell all of these records, not really knowing what's in there, to a collector for pennies on the dollar. I do have a spreadsheet of all my records, but I don't really have the values of them there. And if I was smart years ago, I would have started recording them all on Discogs, but I didn't, and now it's kind of too late for that. So I think part of what I'm going to do is continually over the years purge the records. So in theory, the collection would get smaller and there'd be less for them to have to deal with. I mean, for the time being, I love my records too much to want to get rid of all of them and think about my untimely death or anything like that. That said, it is definitely on my mind, and I know my kids aren't necessarily into the same music as me and into record collecting, so I'm sure they'll want to hold on to a handful of records that meant something to me, but the rest of them, at this point, dear 33ers, I don't know where they're going to end up going. All right, 33ers, how would you answer these questions? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'll be back again real soon. I'll see you in the comments. Until then, keep on spinning.